The recently released Apple Studio display is making waves as one of the hottest new tech products on the market. I personally purchased one the moment it was announced, and after using it for around 12 hours a day for the last couple of days, I want to talk about a few warnings that you should be aware of before you hit the add to cart button yourself. Let's get into it. All right, so first things first, there are a lot of things that I love about this display. So before I get into a few of the things that I don't like about it, I want to make a few of the positives crystal clear. First and foremost, it just plain works. It's super color accurate. The built-in color profiles are great for photo editing, for color grading, for watching movies, etc. It comes color calibrated by Apple to match every Apple display, whether it's an iPhone, iPad, MacBook, or this Studio display. This is the biggest selling point for me because I've personally had a horrible time calibrating my LG monitors, and I've often resorted to doing all of my coloring and editing on my MacBook Pro screen, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a display in the first place. Secondly, this thing looks absolutely gorgeous. The build quality is great, it feels like it's gonna last forever, and the tilt function is super fluid despite being all that it really does. But more on that in a moment. Admittedly, part of me does wish the side bezels were a little bit thinner, but that's just nitpicking, and I'm glad that they're consistent all the way around with no chin and no notch, like some of the other Apple products. From an audio perspective, the speakers are actually quite impressive. I haven't been using studio monitor speakers on my desk since I stopped producing music many years ago, and it's actually quite nice to have the added desk space without compromising too much on sound quality. It's hard to really describe sound of the speakers in a video, but I will just say that across the range from highs, mids, lows, it's actually super impressive. My roommate upstairs has even had to come down and ask me to turn the bass down, which is impressive given how slim this panel is. It is also basically exactly what everyone has been asking for, an iMac display without the iMac. And in that respect, it hits on exactly what people were hoping for. Okay, now with that out of the way, I do want to provide a few of those buyer beware warnings that you should keep in mind before purchasing this for yourself. Of course, this warning list would not be complete without mentioning the obvious, the price. For a panel to start at $1,600 and not even be able to adjust the height, well, that's pretty steep. Considering the price range, it misses out on a lot of things that people might consider deal breakers. No high refresh rate, a peak brightness of only 600 nits, which means no HDR. Now, in the 5K realm, there are really not all that many options outside of something like the LG Ultrafine, which is 100 nits dimmer but $300 cheaper. However, in the 4K monitor world, there are loads of great displays with tons of bells and whistles. But of course, they're not made by Apple, and the build quality really isn't nearly as nice. And you may find yourself needing to buy a pricey monitor calibration tool some point down the line. So yes, it is absolutely very difficult to justify the price point of this display, but I will say, for the points that I just mentioned, it is a very, very nice display, and it looks very, very good. Not just the physical specs of it, but the actual viewing experience on this display is wonderful. Now the next warning for you, and this is a little bit of a smaller one, but there is no power button. It's not uncommon for me to leave my machine running, but want to leave the display off. And to this point, I have been unable to find any way to do so. I've spoken with Apple support, and they have confirmed as much. There's just no way to turn off the power. On the topic of power, the power cord is also not removable. I mean, sure, there are videos on YouTube of people yanking out to the point that it comes out, but it is very clear that it is not meant to be user removable. Knowing how cords go, this could be an issue down the line. Say your dog chews it, or it gets otherwise damaged. Well, you can't go to the never-ending cord and dongle section on the Apple Store and get a new one. You need to get this surfaced to be replaced, and then you're out the entire panel until it's replaced, which is definitely a bummer. Now, before I get into the next topic, I want to mention that we have a shockingly low percentage of you who are subscribed to the channel. So if you like my content, you like this video, it would be great if you subscribed. But besides that, the absolute worst thing about this display is the stand. I recommend you be very, very, very thoughtful about which stand you decide to purchase at the time of purchase. The lack of versatility here, if you decide to switch your setup in the future, or if you just measure things wrong, is beyond annoying. Now it does say in very small fine print, only once you click the little info button on the checkout page, note, each stand or mount adapter is built in. They are not interchangeable, so it is important to consider your workplace needs at the time of purchase. Well, shoot. Now, Mac Rumors is reporting that there is a future option for Apple technicians to change this for you at an Apple store. There's no price tag associated with this, as far as I can tell. So I personally went with the standard mount. And if you have the standard mount display placed directly on your desk and your chair is at the proper seating position with 45 degrees of your elbows, then the height of the monitor is just way too low. You're going to be looking down at the monitor. But if you're like me and you have a monitor riser on your desk, then you are able to get it just about right. But again, that's assuming that you have perfect posture, and let's be honest, very few of us have that. So for what it's worth, I'm using the Grove-made riser on my desk. So it does add about 6 inches under the display, and at that point, it is roughly eye level. But regardless of whether or not you have your own riser, this really means that you should be opting for the height adjustable and tilt adjustable option unless you have the VESA mount. This means that you're looking at another $400 just to raise or lower your monitor, which is more expensive than some similarly spec'd out 4K monitors on their own. Another downside of this monitor is there is not any ability for multiple inputs. I personally work with 2 computers, one for my day job and one is my personal machine for all of my creative work and my photography business. So the ability to swap between 2 computers is actually quite nice. I understand that this is probably a little bit more of a particular use case to many, but if you wanted to plug in something like a gaming PC, an Xbox, or have this be your all-in-one display, you're out of luck. And now while we're on the topic of using 2 of something, while I mentioned that the audio is amazing, if you're using 2 studio displays, there seems to be currently no way to have audio come out of both of them simultaneously. You have to select which display the audio is the source of. It feels to me like with an A13 chip in this thing, the one that's currently powering the iPhone 11, you'd expect it to be able to do something a little bit more. The A13 almost feels like wasted in the same way that the M1 chip is wasted in the newer generation iPads. Maybe Apple is just sort of reducing the number of chip variations that they need to make. I don't know, but if it's all of this just to power the spatial audio and the webcam, it really does sort of seem like overkill to me. And you should at least be able to play audio out of both of them at the same time. And that sort of brings me to my final point, which is the webcam. I personally have found it to be a little bit of a dud. I expected the quality would be at least on par with the newer generation MacBook Pros, but honestly, it's just not. The image quality is pretty disappointing and it doesn't really stand up to all of the other front-facing cameras that Apple is producing. It's grainy, and even when I'm using my massive key light to illuminate the scene, I'm still getting a little bit of noise in the shadows. And it also just looks generally very flat. This is a test of the Mac Studio webcam. We are not using center stage right now, which is why my head is cut off. We're using a massive key light as well, the Aperture 120D Mark II with a massive softbox at 80% brightness. And you still see, despite this massive key light, how much grain we're getting in all of the shadows. It just doesn't look all that great. This is a test of the new webcam on the M1 Max MacBook Pro, the new version. Same exact lighting setup, same exact situation. That said, I do find center stage to be pretty fantastic. Due to those mount height issues that I was talking about earlier, unless you want to end up looking like Wilson from Home Improvement, I'm realizing that that reference probably went over just about everybody's head, in the same way that this webcam would go right over everyone's head, unless you're using center stage. So despite the camera itself being a little bit on the poor side, center stage is a very nice and welcomed addition. Now, are any of these things deal breakers for me? I'm personally going to say no. Do I wish I went with the height adjustable version? Absolutely. Do I think that it's worth an additional $400 on top of this already very overpriced display? Absolutely not. So what do you think? Are you going to be purchasing the Studio display? Do you think that it's worth the incredibly high price tag? Or maybe you've already purchased one and you're just waiting for it to ship? Let me know in the comments below. And YouTube thinks that you'll like this video next, so why don't you tap on it and see if they're right. I'll see you in the next one.